in the part in between, because there's also a difference in the information you're trying to protect and the information a government is trying to protect. One of the main differences in the attacker's side is that governments are funded. They don't have just one person or a group of persons that are doing in their weekends creating a few tools, but they have really big budgets. Mostly non-disclosed budgets, so it doesn't really tell you how many people they can employ, but they do have huge budgets. And that has a reason, because the stakes for most governments are huge. They're not only talking about protecting their secrets, because secrets are part, but those secrets probably, when leaked, also give something away. On the one hand side, it can give away an enormous economic stimulus to your own economy. Well, there are some examples where Boeing won at the last minute an order from Airbus in Saudi Arabia just because, well, they got some extra information from the government. And that means that a large number of jobs and money and tax money is going to the US instead of France. That's a really good stimulus for the United States. On the other side, there are issues of national security. I mean, there's a lot of information that, well, is critical for your own, for your national security. Finding the bottle. And, well, you want to protect that. You don't want national security compromised. And in some cases, and that's not really in the Western world, but there's also threats to autonomy. The result can be that some country is invading you, taking over your country, and, well, making it their own. One of the main differences you see between government-level protection and attacks and on the normal level is the fact that mass attacks happen, well, in the normal world. Targeted attacks do happen, but are much smaller. And on the government level, you see that target attacks are much more common, but you won't see them. That's probably the reason why. One of the most recent examples that was visible was the GhostNet, where, well, presumably China, mostly presumably, very likely China, invaded the network of the Dalai Lama very specifically because, well, they are a terrorist threat to China in their eyes. But you might ask me, but aren't we all friends? We have NATO, we have the United Nations, we have the European Union, and we promise to be nice to each other, we promise to, well, protect each other, and that's true, but most of those bonds are only on a military level. They are not meant for on the economy scale. They're not on the economic level. Even the EU, although we open up the borders, all the parties within the EU, well, not all, probably like to get the taxes in their own government because there's no central government. And you can see that in the different laws and regulations that are in effect worldwide. Most notably, the US, the UK, and France have very public economic espionage possibilities where in the public law there's regulated that they are allowed to use their intelligence services to gather information from other nations that can help themselves. So they're allowed to, well, in this case, spy on Airbus to help Boeing, or the other way around. There are also a lot of laws that allow the wiretapping to legally be done. Well, the US is an example everybody knows, but even countries like Sweden, where at the beginning of this year, they suddenly allowed very wide share tapping to be done, not only on the national network, but also on all the communications coming into the network, into the country network. And as Sweden is a hub for a large part of the internet, that does touch our security. And in addition, there are some, well, very big, broad arrangements. In 1996, all major Western countries came together and sat around and said, well, we all know we have to protect secrets, that's good, But we also know that some countries are third-rate countries, and we don't really want them to be able to protect their secrets, because that might threaten our national security. So we're going to limit exporting of very hard-to-break products to those countries, and, well, maybe that can help us in the future. The Wassenaar arrangement is still in effect. So the main question is this story and the rest of this story, is it going to be fact or fiction? It's probably a bit of both. I can't promise you that everything is real, but everything is referenced with information from the news, from information that I actually know, and history can tell us a lot, because especially since more and more information becomes available about history, it tells us a lot about what happens and what we can do. There are three major parts I want to look at, and one of the first is cryptography. One of the funny things to see is that cryptography mainly up till the 1970s was only government business. Nobody invented algorithms, nobody was busy with cryptography, it was only the government. They started way back in the Roman Empire and even before that for protecting their important information. And, well, during the Second World War, First World War, you really saw that also the governments were trying to break them really hard and had the funds. The Enigma, the German cryptography machine that was used to protect all the military information, was broken by the British and the American, or actually it was done by the Polish, but they did the actual legwork. And you see that, well, the governments are really focusing on cryptography at that point, are really doing their business, and that the major funded governments, and America is one of them, are way ahead of the competition. And how can you tell? Well, it's hard to put a concrete statement on it, but there has been a large, enormous amount of research in cryptography, cryptographic theory, and that shows, and I'll show you in the next slide how you can see that. But you can also see that after the Second World War and towards the 70s, things aren't going so well for the government, because they really like brute force in cryptography, because then you can get the information back, and you see that, well, they can't keep up. DES is a fine example of both, namely, on the one hand side, DES, the main cipher still in use, well, in triple DES form, was introduced in 1976. It originally came from the Lucifer algorithm from IBM. And, well, it had a nice structure, and there were some parts called S-boxes, and they had some random data, and it then really worked. But the NSA at the final moment said, well, we're going to fix those S-boxes for you, we're going to change them, and just don't ask why, it's okay, and trust us. Everybody thought it was because they were building in the back door, but the result was, in the 1990s, there was a paper about a differential cryptanalysis, and it was a new paper, it was really new, the work was done in the research environment, and well, what happened? DES wasn't vulnerable. It was extremely well protected against differential cryptanalysis. And it was only one of the few cases that could have been chosen to actually be protected in that way. It was a show of the fact that the NSA was already in the 1970s way ahead of us and of the research world, and was already doing a lot of research, and they knew things we only invented in the 1990s. On the other hand side, you see that the brute forcing capacity they liked to have was not enough. They limited the original 128-bit Lucifer algorithm to 56 bits. And they didn't do that because they didn't want the Americans to have good protection, but they also wanted the option to be able to crack it in some way, probably. So what to do when, as a government, when you see that the key sizes that are available are way bigger than the brute force capacity you have? Well, you do the only logical thing.